From Utah, we go to Colorado, where Deion Sanders has once again set the expectations sky high. He's talking playoffs. I'm talking bowl. Colorado's goal is to bowl this season, I think, folks. There is some upside here. We're going to talk about them. They are one of the 8 teams, I think, in the Big 12 that has a chance, if they really hit on some key things, to compete for a Big 12 championship. But we'll talk about all the position groups here. OC is Pat Shurmur. He took over play calling from Sean Lewis during last season when they made that switch. Rob Livingston comes in from Cincinnati as their DC. Look, Cincinnati does some great things in the secondary. I love Lou. If you listen to the NFL show, you know how high I am on Lou. I think he's fantastic. The Bengals run a very interesting defense from a secondary standpoint because they have to try to combat some of the most prolific passers in the NFL, given they play in the AFC. We'll see how much of that was Livingston. We'll get a real good look at that quickly because the calling card for this defense is going to be the secondary. But we'll talk defense after we talk offense. Pat Shurmur, OC. I think it will be a nice switch overall for Colorado. I like Sean Lewis. I think he's a fantastic offensive mind. I think he's going to have a lot of success. I just don't think he was a good fit for Colorado because what he wanted to do didn't really fit with what they were set up to do. He wanted to be up tempo, wide receiver choice routes, a lot of passing, and it was very productive for Shedeur Sanders, but you saw the problems. You know, sometimes he was holding on to the ball a little bit too long because there wasn't that faith that the wide receiver and him were seeing the same thing. They weren't able to really run the ball effectively. Part of that was the offensive line fault. There was a very large mental load put on Shedeur every single snap, pretty much. Not to say he can't handle it, because he clearly could. He had a very productive season last season. But I think just the fact that Pat Shurmur is going to simplify some things, there's going to be more just designed handoffs where there isn't that option. It's just a run play. You can kind of take a break for a moment. I think is going to do some wonders for Shedeur Sanders, just getting those kind of mental rest reps a little bit there and giving your brain a second just to kind of have some off time here, as well as I think it'll be good for what they're suited for a little bit more, this offense. But we'll see. Shedeur Sanders, been talking about him, bona fide NFL prospect. I'll be very interested to see what he's worked on this offseason. I'm going to talk a little bit more about some concerns when I talk about the offensive line, but he's really solid. We all kind of know what he is at this point, a very good NFL prospect. The wide receiver room is their deepest, strongest room on offense by far. It is the most talented. There's a lot of depth here. It allows for Travis Hunter to play some less snaps. They're going to need him a lot more on defense this season, I think. So having this deep room and not having to have him play, like 420 something snaps or whatever he did last year, which was crazy. But he's so ultra talented that you want him playing both ways. Is going to be nice, I think. You know, Wester comes in from FAU. I think he's the best. LeJounte is a really nice piece for them to pick up this offseason. If you want to get familiar with his game, pop on the FAU Clemson tape. He jumps off the tape. He looked absolutely fantastic in that game against a very good secondary and an elite defense, like very good on an FAU team. And he also offers you something on special teams. So he's a really nice piece. You get Will Shepard in from Vandy. I like him. Horn may seem a little bit of a smaller role this season. Jimmy Horn's back just because of how much depth they have, but that's fantastic because as I will repeat over and over again, this is a collision sport. This isn't a contact sport. This is a collision sport. Depth is incredibly important if you want to make a run at things. They have it in this room. Where they don't have it, I don't think, is the running back room. Dallan Hayden's a nice piece. He looked good in spurts at Ohio State. He was surrounded by some elite level talent, though, so we'll see how well his game translates to the Colorado system, but he's nice. The loss of Dylan Edwards, I think, is huge. I know Colorado fans don't really want to admit it because he wasn't like this bell cow back, but as I talked about him in the Kansas State preview and breakdown, he's a nice off-speed pitch. He's a nice depth piece. He allows you to do some different things from the passing game and the run game. It's important. McCaskill was also important. Like, those were really good depth pieces here for them. I think this depth is going to be challenged, especially later in their schedule, based on how the front end looks and then kind of how tough their schedule could shape up to be. So that'll be interesting. Obviously, what everybody wants to talk about is the offensive line room. and what that's going to look like. It's entirely new, including a new offensive line coach. They don't have a lot of time to get things going in this room. They don't have a lot of time to gel because they have North Dakota State in the first week, which they should win that game, I think, pretty handedly. We'll see, but that should be a pretty good win for them. But then they go to Nebraska, and Nebraska defensively for this offensive line is going to be a handful. They got some man-eaters on that defensive line. That's a really sound, really effective defense. We're going to talk about them in the Big Ten preview. Offensively, Nebraska probably won't be fully up to speed given they're starting a true freshman, so that'll be nice for the Colorado defense. But offensively, this offensive line does not have time to really gel and come together. It's completely new. Tyler Brown was in the program last year. They thought they were going to be able to use his services last year. They couldn't. They're going to get him. He looked nice in the spring game. The spring game was 1v2s, so take it with what you will. I wasn't hugely over-impressed by the offensive line, but it looked fine. Jordan Seaton, this is the question mark, I think, for me, because he gives up the sack in the spring game. Okay, long way between spring game, fall camp, and then the start of the season. Plenty of time for exponential growth. But you are a true freshman moving from the high school ranks to the college ranks, playing one of the toughest positions on offense at left tackle. He is an incredible prospect. The concern in his game from a pass blocking standpoint is he does tend to get beat wide. And that could be a problem and a recipe for disaster because Shedeur Sanders prefers to go back and out as opposed to up and in to his coverages. So, he is not a guy as of right now, and part of that's because he didn't have a lot of trust in his offensive line to try to work through a maneuver up through dirty pockets. He doesn't tend to try to step up and work within those. He tends to try to extend plays by going back and out, which is not unusual. You see that with guys like Patrick Mahomes, for example, in the NFL. My defensive coordinator for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Todd Bowles during the Super Bowl identified that and schemed up his defenses to apply pressure to one side, knowing that Patrick Mahomes would go back and out and try to back end the outside to try to extend the play, and then he'd have somebody sitting right there. It'll be interesting to see if defenses try to mimic that a little bit here. But that could be a potential concern, but he's a fantastic prospect. I think Justin Mayers from UTEP is probably the best of the bunch. He's going to have to be their anchor. They've got a lot of experience here. I think he's going to have to be the key piece. He's going to be the guy that's going to have to kind of bring everybody together. I think at center, they're looking really good. They have nice depth at center too. Maybe they can kind of move some pieces around there. So new offensive line coach, entirely new offensive line, not a lot of time to get that started. We'll see how they gel at the start of the season. Now the defense. I mean, there was nothing good that you can say about this defense last year. This defense was terrible last season. Charles Kelly was not the most adaptable coach. Livingston has made it a point that he's going to try to be more adaptable and tailor the defense to what he believes the strengths is, which is going to be the secondary. But this defense was absolutely they couldn't stop a nosebleed last season. I mean, third most points given up per game. They had 5 games where offenses scored 40 plus points on them. They were bottom 10 nationally in yards allowed per game. Just terrible. It starts in the trenches. They identified that. They got better though. BJ Green from Arizona State was a piece Arizona State very much wanted to keep. They could not retain him. They were upset about it because he is a bona fide, really, really nice piece to add on the defensive line. I think Hayes, if he can get off the ball and get some pressure, will be nice. There's depth here, but it's depth in the sense of it's a lot of raw balls of clay that they got to shape into something. So this is where Deion and his program, his coaching staff are really going to be tested. How good are you at developing players? Can you be a developmental program as well as this high skill recruiter, good salesman, win now mentality? You have to be able to develop this defensive line because there are nice pieces here. If this defensive line does not perform, it is on the coaching staff, not the pieces that they were handed, because they've got some nice pieces there. Linebackers a concern. I don't like the linebacker room. I don't think it's very good. And they know it. That's why they tried to go after a guy like DJ Lundy from Florida State and acquire him. They weren't able to kind of finalize that. While DJ Lundy's not great in coverage, he is a mentality boost for sure. He's a thumper. He brings a certain type of edge to the linebacker room that they may be missing. They're going to kind of rely on Bentley a lot. He's really good at blitzing, kind of a liability in coverage. That's why they're bringing Trevor Woods, who played safety for them last season, down into the linebacker room. They're going to try to convert him there. I think Hill Green might be a guy too that they can get some production out of. They're going to need it though, because once again, I think this room is very thin. I'm not a huge fan of it. This secondary, I made a comment earlier and I got jumped on after the spring game because I talked about how I thought the secondary was thin, and I want to kind of clarify that. Frontline talent's fantastic. Not a lot of depth behind that. They add Preston Hodges from Liberty, who was really good, and he was part of one of the best group of five, if not the best group of five program at Liberty. You get DJ McKinney over from Oklahoma State. He was a really nice, solid coverage player last season for them. This is where you see Livingston's flexibility, though. And this is where, if you're a Colorado fan, you have to be hopeful for what he's going to be as a DC, because they are taking Travis Hunter and they're moving him more inside at that nickel spot. That's probably where he should have been all along. I talked about it last season. He seems, I don't want to say allergic to the weight room, but he hasn't had the development that you would like to see from a physicality standpoint. Great on the conditioning part of conditioning and strength and training, not so great on the strength part. And you saw it because he got bullied a lot on the outside. I mean, heck, Stanford might still be playing pass and catch on him right now. It happened all season. You didn't have to look far before we got that. He's still a very good corner, but he does have that ability to get bullied on the outside. What he is elite at, what his best attribute is his ability to move laterally, his ability to stop and start. Fan-freaking-tastic. Moving him inside, having that flexibility to do so, I think is a incredibly smart move by Livingston and this Colorado coaching staff. I think it's going to pay dividends for them. I think he's going to be fantastic in there. Shiloh's going to be interesting. I've talked to some people that have some insight into the program and are familiar with the program. They're saying he had surgery this offseason and he could miss the first couple games, potentially. If that's the case, that's a problem, because he's not the best in coverage, but he's fine and serviceable. He really helps their run game. And with a linebacking room that has question marks and two teams in North Dakota State and Nebraska that are going to look to pound the rock on you, if he misses those 2 games, that could be a huge loss. Ultimately, when I look at the whole of this Colorado football team, I said it after the spring game, I'm going to say it again. I think this is a 5-6 win football team. Vegas thinks the same. They put it at 5.5. I think that's spot on. There is some upside here, though, too. They are my 8th team out of the 8 teams that I think can win the Big 12. They're sort of the last team to kind of make that cut. That's because they have a lot of skill position talent on this team, but it's going to require some injury luck. It's going to require just some normal, that ball is shaped funny and bounces funny sometimes type of luck. They're really going to need Deion Sanders and this coaching staff to up their game. We have yet to see Deion and his coaching staff, whether it was when he was at the HBCU or his first year at Colorado, do well in big key moments from a coaching perspective. He has been fantastic when his teams have a clear-cut roster talent advantage. Easy to win those football games, though. The problem is when that advantage shrinks, the expectation for them to win tends to shrink, because there are mental lapses from a coaching staff standpoint. There's questions about how well they really develop in the offseason, how well they prepare week to week to compete against some of these teams. Let's see if he can take a jump. If he can take a jump, because the Big 12, especially on their schedule, there are so many coin flip games. The margin for error is so thin because so many of these teams are so close together that it's going to come down to a handful of plays, a handful of decisions throughout games that are ultimately going to make this. I think ceiling, they're an 8-win team, but I think ultimately they're probably going to fall in that 5-6 win range. I think with the changes they made on the offensive line and the defensive line, they are about a 1.5 to 2 game better team than last year's team. Let's see what they can do from a coaching standpoint. They got to get off to a quick start, though. They don't get off to a quick start, it's going to be very tough for them. All right, Arizona.